Another offseason full of news and potential news at Michigan. We will serve it up with Isaiah Hull. You can catch him at Wolverines Wire, also his On Wolverine podcast. Isaiah, what's going on today?
Well, just got all the got all of the guys that could have gone to the NFL draft that are coming back. Got that all wrapped up. Waiting on the Jim Harbaugh news. So in essence, it's a slow day, and it's been kind of an eventful weekend. But nonetheless, it's just continuing to play the waiting game and see where things go.
Yeah, we'll get to the NFL draft here in just a second. We will go to what's at the forefront of everyone's minds. So, if Jim Harbaugh leaves, obviously, then Michigan's got to go find a coach to replace one of the better coaches in college football. Okay, let's say he stays. Do you have an issue with this? Some people may call it a circus. Some people may just call it a distraction. Whatever this is becoming just about every offseason with Jim Harbaugh's flirtations with the NFL.
I don't like it. However, I right before coming on, I heard Joel Klatt's thoughts on it, and it actually makes a little bit of sense to me what he had to say about it. Before I get to what he said, what I don't like is that obviously after 6 years, really five, the first 5 years, every offseason it was this Jim Harbaugh is going to bolt to the NFL, and he was able to just squash that immediately. And yet it became like kind of a recruiting distraction. Then it made a little bit more sense in 2020 after that season. It wasn't really that is he going to go to the NFL? It was kind of does Michigan even want him at this point? Because clearly this isn't working. So he had to build things back up. So then the first year he does it, 2021, he goes and interviews with the Vikings with the expectation he's going to be offered the job and take the job. And it doesn't work out that way. But as a result, we saw it's not like the recruiting class from 2023 ended up being awful. It was kind of middling. It's kind of where we used to see Clemson tend to finish even in its big runs, kind of, 17th ish, top 20 class, but not anything necessarily great to write home about. Not really any marquee recruits. But that was kind of the issue, is that it really made some of those guys that seemed like they were likely to pick Michigan. Dante Moore, a guy that got offered by Michigan when he was in 8th grade. I mean, it's weird for me to even see him now as a quasi grown up about to go play college football, because I'm used to seeing him as kind of like this little kid that Michigan had offered. They weren't able to get some of those types of guys as a result of that uncertainty. So to kind of find yourself in this position yet again, that's somewhat problematic for the program in a lot of respects, because as much as he can go out there and say, hey, you know what? No, I want to be at Michigan for life. Kind of like what he said after he came back. He said, I'll be at Michigan for as long as they'll have me. To go through this rigmarole once again, that ends up making it so you can have some of those same issues you just had a year ago. And you would think a team coming off of back-to-back Big Ten championships, back-to-back college football playoff appearances, and you have so many players coming back, that you would want to be able to go out and show recruits and be like, hey, if you're a running back, you're an offensive lineman, why wouldn't you want to come play in Ann Arbor? They haven't been able to really do that. Now, I really like what Joel Klatt had to say about the matter, which kind of eased my kind of version up a little bit, where he said that Michigan, from an institutional standpoint, needed to kind of modernize. And he's doing these things to not last year, but more so this year, which would make sense given his statements, his intent to remain at Michigan. He said it on December 4th. He said it again a week and a half ago, that he fully intends on coaching Michigan in 2023, that he's going out and having these interviews and conversations that he's had essentially to leverage Michigan into changing a lot of the things that it's doing as far as NIL, perhaps it's transfers and admissions and different things of that nature, that has kind of set Michigan back in a lot of ways, because Michigan is a very stodgy institution. It hasn't quite modernized with a lot of the recruiting elements. Now, if that's true, I like it, but I still don't like the fact that it does take away. You've got players right now who are sitting there wondering, is Jim Harbaugh going to be my coach? And he's telling them, yes, I'm going to be your coach. But until pen to, is put to paper, there's certainly going to be that opportunity that someone swoops in and tries to sign him to a max contract, gives him full power, the kind of things that he absolutely desires and craves from the NFL. It's just a matter of you need to be able to retain what you had built, because last year, not only did you lose recruits, you lost your offensive coordinator as a direct result of what had happened, because it seemed like he thought he was going to be maybe that next in line type of guy, and it didn't end up going that way. So he ended up bolting for Miami. And you want to be able to have the consistency as far as if you're going to bring the band back together as far as players, you need to do the same as coaches, and you need to be able to lure some of those top recruits to even they have their hat in the ring for a couple 2023 guys still. Nicholas Harbaughs, the 5-star, can play on either side of the ball, or Jamel Howard, the defensive tackle who was once committed to Wisconsin and seemed like he's Michigan's to lose. There's a couple other guys out there they're still trying to get, but you can't keep on doing this, because you know what? You have another good year next year. Like is expected given the personnel. You find yourself in a situation where, again, NFL teams are going to be sitting there saying, well, why don't we talk to Jim Harbaugh? And it's going to be a lot harder to shut it down, that, if it's going to keep on happening on a yearly basis, which 2 years is a trend.
Because I have no issue with any one of us looking at our career options. And for Jim Harbaugh, that's at the NFL level. I also have absolutely no thought that Jim Harbaugh can't love his job at Michigan and still be interested in the NFL. Both can exist at the same time. I have no doubt that Jim Harbaugh loves Michigan as much as any head coach in the country loves his school. That's obvious. Look at his past. Look at his legacy. I have an issue with maybe some of the things that he has stated, not as much this offseason, but last offseason when he put kind of a close on the whole deal and said, I'm a Michigan guy, and whatever the verbiage was after it was all said and done, that this was kind of in the past and we won't hear of this anytime soon. And here we are the next offseason, bam, we're back in the NFL circle.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that, because it's not that, if he wants to move on for his career and just because he craves a Super Bowl, then so be it. But you can't leave Michigan. If you're going to love Michigan the way that I know he does and he claims he does, you don't want to leave Michigan in the lurch either, which is a large reason why I believe he'll be back. I think that this is, more so a power play, and he's trying to get the things that he wants. And obviously it's bad timing with these, the hamburger gate of it all when it comes to these NCAA violations that that have been uncovered. Very akin to what ended up sinking Jim Tressel. It doesn't sound like Michigan's going in down that road though. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly that gets cleared up, and if it does in fact get cleared up and he gets re-signed to a more substantial contract, which is what the word on the street is at the moment. So I do think that it's all fine and well if you do want to look for other options. It's just a matter of you need to make sure that the place that you're leaving is in good standing. And while it is in good standing as far as personnel and everything like that, if Michigan, say he does leave, Michigan would be significantly behind the 8 ball when it comes to head coaching searches, as far as retaining the class that literally just both signed, as far as the recruiting class, as well as all of those guys who decided to come back. Now they've all kind of said, hey, we're back regardless of what Jim Harbaugh does, but you also don't want to essentially implode your program at the same time, just because you have gotten some kind of professional accolades again after getting in the college football playoff 2 years in a row. So I think it's a matter of trying to make sure that you're keeping the program on good standing, because that's, I think, of paramount importance. Maybe not as much to him, but it does sound like he, again, if Joel Klatt, what his opinion is, if that's an informed opinion, I think that could be brilliant. I still don't like the optics of it personally.
And the other aspect, Isaiah, of this that I can't quite figure out is why always Jim Harbaugh? So I'm trying to think of the last major head college football coach where it was out in public that he was conversing with the NFL. And Lincoln Riley, Dallas Cowboys, that's the first thing that comes to mind 3 or 4 years ago. But we don't hear about Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, fill in the blank, flirting with the NFL every offseason. Now, I don't know if this is because Jim Harbaugh wants it to be public or because he does have a different background. He does have a unique set of accomplishments when it comes to the only major college football coach currently in the college ranks who has achieved to the level that he has at the NFL. So maybe he's just more attractive as a candidate than these other guys, and therefore he's the target in the collegiate ranks.
I think there is absolutely something to that latter part. Actually, honestly, both parts. The latter part in particular, because I forgot what the number was. It was something like 49, 11, and 2 or something in his 4 years with San Francisco. Those aren't the exact numbers. That's just me spitballing there.
It's the fourth best winning percentage in the history of the NFL.
Yeah, it was stellar, and it happened almost immediately. I see a lot of people retconning what happened in San Francisco, even on the Michigan message boards. They say, well, San Francisco was loaded, and it's like, well, they hadn't made the playoffs in 10 years. They were 6-10 the year beforehand. I was a lot more of a regular NFL follower in that time, and I remember when he took over, I was like, well, that's going to be a challenge, and turns out not so much. In terms of at least how quickly he got the 49ers to, the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, and 3 out of the 4 years they made it that far. It's pretty spectacular. And like you said, there aren't these other coaches that get that. And I think that's in large part because of some of those guys who have gone and come back. Nick Saban did not do very well with the Miami Dolphins. Matt Rule just more recently turned around Temple and then Baylor and then goes to the Carolina Panthers as middling. Chip Kelly did a great job at Oregon, and actually, while he did still leave the NFL with a overall winning percentage, it was only by, I think, like 3 games. He was like 29-26 or something like that. Whereas Jim Harbaugh went and just absolutely crushed it. I think that is a big part of it. Now, I do think that because he hired an agent for the first time in his tenure at Michigan after, I believe it was after the Ohio State game. And some of these things like the discussion with the ownership of the Carolina Panthers, it turned out that was initiated by the Harbaugh side, not the Carolina Panthers side. So that does seem, as someone who has an agency background, everything, I worked at United Talent Agency for 4 years. Everything is always about optics. And especially if you find out something like that it was brought up by the Harbaugh side and then it gets out there, because generally when we hear that type of reporting, it does come from the NFL side. It does typically end up kind of being like something where the NFL teams are putting it out there to either leverage other guys or to try to leverage Michigan and him and all of that kind of thing. A little bit different when it's coming from his side. It does make me think that was a power play one way or the other, because you wouldn't put that out there. You wouldn't want to initiate those types of things if you weren't serious on departing. And yet before that, and then not too long after that, he made the statement on the Fiesta Bowl conference call that I was on, where he said, I would be back enthusiastically coaching Michigan in 2023. And then a week after, not even, I think it was just a couple days after the Carolina news came out, he puts out a statement and saying, I will be enthusiastically back at Michigan coaching in 2023. So you always have to kind of question the motives, because that's kind of an agent type move to try to leverage one thing into another thing. And that was kind of the thing I learned. Now I worked in motion picture talent, so it's not quite the same as sports, but you're always trying to, you're taking the next role in order to get that next better role, right? You're not taking a role to kind of stay on the same plane. So it kind of does feel like it is that kind of power move to some degree. But the only person that could really answer exactly what he's thinking and why he's doing what he's doing is Jim Harbaugh, because he is a weird guy. He does have different motivations for different things. And to say that he's kooky would be an understatement. He definitely, I think, I shouldn't share this story. I'll just share a quick moment of how weird he is. I took my girl to go see Justin Bieber over the summer, and we were walking out and randomly run into Jim Harbaugh. And I was like, Jim, and he saw me and he's like, hey, and whatever. And the first thing he says to me is, so you got the Beaver fever too, huh? And it's like, how do you know, like that's just a weird thing to say, right? Like it's just like an abnormal type way to interact with somebody. I found it endearing personally, but it was just like, what do you say back to that? He's just a weird dude. He has weird motivations for different things, and he just operates differently than most of us do. Kind of a savant in a lot of ways. So I don't know the exact motivation. Uh, I again think Klatt has an interesting theory on that, and I think it makes kind of everything else makes sense.
Yeah, there have been so many interactions between Jim Harbaugh and the media and other people interviewing him where I've thought, man, this guy is weird. He's awkward. He's this, he's that. What is the deal with this guy? But when it gets all added up together, he's successful. So it works for him.
I was laughing with Molly McGrath because she got like one of the first questions in at the press conference, the formal press conference the day before the Fiesta Bowl. And I was laughing with her because of all the times that I don't even see it. I'm down on the field. I see it on replay of all the times that she would been on Michigan games this year. And he just completely ducks her and completely is, hey, talk to this guy right here, and how frustrating that was. And she, first or second question, Molly McGrath, ESPN. I'm like, that's got to be vindication, because he is a weird guy like that. And you watched, if you watched the Baltimore Ravens Cincinnati Bengals playoff game yesterday, seeing John Harbaugh reluctantly answering questions in the middle of the game, it's like, how would Jim Harbaugh handle that? He wouldn't,
We got Isaiah Hull here from Wolverine's Wire. Also catch his podcast there on Wolverine. So you alluded to the Burger Gate. Is this as ridiculously minuscule as it appears to be on the surface? And is it maybe even more about just the NCAA trying to get back at Jim Harbaugh because he blew them off?
Essentially, it does sound exactly that. And he basically did the same thing that Jim Tressel did with the Tattoo Gate back in 2011 or 2010, whenever that actually occurred, where he was asked about it by the NCAA and he just was like, oh, no, there's nothing to that. And then they get a receipt and show that, oh, there was something to it. It really is that simple. It wasn't even, I mean, they were commitments, right? They were recruits, but they were commitments dropped by unannounced. So he decided that they were going to go to the Brown Jug and have a little lunch, and then he paid for it. And it's literally now it's against the rules. You shouldn't have done it. You should know better. But, this wasn't like that, some kind of crazy thing like Nicholas Harbor's in town and takes him to Weber's for this crazy surf and turf thing and gets him a hotel room there. It's like $600 a night. It wasn't even anything like that. It was literally as simple as he went and got burgers at a local burger joint and paid for it, and then was not truthful to the NCAA when initially asked about it. So you can make of that what you will, but when you have other programs out there, especially really flaunting the rules in pretty obvious ways, it's pretty amazing that this is the line in the sand that the NCAA has drawn. Now, I'm a hardline rule follower just in life, and granted, I've been on record for a long time, well before my started in this profession, saying that the Tat Gate was kind of ridiculous, and not kind of, but it was. And this is equally as ridiculous. It's if the NCAA is going to turn a blind eye to very obvious cheating that we see running rampant across the sport. I mean, even with NIL, we're seeing pay for play, which is not what the intent of that is, happening constantly. And yet, they don't care about that, and they care about this. It just shows that the priorities are backwards in the institution. That said, Jim Harbaugh was wrong for doing what he did. I'm not saying he wasn't, but and he's going to get some kind of punishment, might be a couple game suspension of some sort, which I think would be deserved for not being truthful. But to make it into this, it's a level 1 violation, and this is the top of the bad, and we don't really see a lot of schools getting punished for really anything. It shows you why the NCAA has become such a joke.
I say if we surveyed College Football Nation, we would get end of the spectrum reviews on JJ McCarthy this season, because a lot of people just buy into 5-star. He's been phenomenal. Look, they've made the college football playoff. He raised the game way above what Cade McNamara could show us. Then the other people would look at, well, he threw 2 pick sixes in the playoff. He was a disaster and he cost him that game. And a lot of other things alluding to maybe him making a few mistakes here and there. So where do you land on JJ McCarthy and his development?
I think he's doing a very good job for the most part. But I think that Michigan does a disservice to him and itself by sometimes not trying to prepare him more. And while we have seen him being able to go out there and sling it against Ohio State and Purdue, and ultimately in that TCU game, after the pick sixes, it seemed like he really kind of came alive in a lot of ways, outdueled Max Duggan in terms of yards thrown. Not that that matters when you throw 2 pick sixes. I think Michigan did itself a disservice by essentially saying, well, we have Blake Corum and we can just run him into the ground. And that worked until it didn't, until he got injured. Then suddenly you have JJ McCarthy not necessarily being used to seeing a lot of different things because he hasn't been out there throwing the ball 30 times a game. So I think that he's doing a very good job. Ultimately, he's doing mostly what Michigan's asked him to do. He was very efficient in the top half of the season when Michigan was kind of asking a little bit more of him. And it seemed like once Michigan kind of started to dial back the passing and be concerned more with trying to run, like he was trying to make a statement, kind of started in that Penn State game, going up against what was at that time a top 10 run defense, and Michigan rushed for 418 yards. It was like they wanted to make a statement. I think that while that was great that they were able to do that and make that statement, I think it kind of left JJ a little bit high and dry, because when you look at how a lot of quarterbacks grow, they sometimes get those types of mistakes out early. And JJ had only thrown a couple interceptions up until that point. The one in the end zone against Indiana, the kind of fluky one that happened against Penn State where it bounced off of it was Luke Schoonmaker's hands and off of a helmet and then into the arms of a waiting Penn State defender. And that was pretty much it, right? And then you have 2 that go for 6 in the championship game, or the playoff. I think that it didn't help that he didn't have a lot of experience necessarily, except for just in a couple of games of being the guy they had to really truly depend on with his arm. What I think about CJ Stroud and how he was in his redshirt freshman year, specifically in that Oregon game, the first half felt like it didn't go very well. And it was like he learned how to play better as that game went on. It was kind of similar for JJ McCarthy in that TCU game. The problem is he didn't have another game the next week to kind of put more of what he learned together, especially being a guy that doesn't tend to make a lot of the same mistakes twice. So I think Michigan would do better by him to be a little bit more balanced than what it has been. I believe they ran for something like 3,600 yards and passed for 3,000 this past year. I'd like to see that balance out a little bit more, or maybe see a few more passing yards, just especially in the non-conference, because that was where they really had an opportunity that they let them pass them by. Really, is they could have gone out there against competition that they were going to kind of beat no matter what, and they really should have been airing it out a lot more, and they didn't do that. They put JJ out there for 10 snaps or really 10 passes. He did what he did with them, and then they kind of cycled through so that they could say, hey, we played 8 quarterbacks against UConn, and it didn't do him any favors. You don't see a lot of other programs trying to break in their new starting quarterback by having him out there for a cursory amount, get the big lead, and then leave. You see often, again, I point to Ohio State. CJ Stroud stays in there a little bit longer, especially last year, 2021 rather. I think that Michigan needs to kind of give him more time on task, because we've seen that he can throw the ball. We've seen that he can generally be very accurate, and he can make NFL like style throws that most people can't make, throwing across his body, putting it in pinpoint great locations where you look at it and say, hey, JJ, that was a great throw. Don't make that throw again because it was a little too dangerous. He can do some of those things, but he needs to be able to have more time where they ask him to do that. And especially considering where Michigan stands against a lot of the opponents that they're going to face, that's the smarter move. And then you can rely on your offensive line and your run game as kind of a counterbalance to that instead of it being just your main thing.
Yeah, 2022 was 2 consecutive non-conference seasons in which I was expecting Michigan to take advantage of inferior opponents to work and develop the passing game, whether that was with Cade McNamara exclusively the year before or a combination between he and JJ. And then, of course, they settled on JJ this past season early after, I believe, one game, right?
Yeah,
And then
that was after the second game that they named him the starter.
Game. Yeah, and didn't look to develop the passing game. But again, it's difficult to argue with the end result of all of it, which is another Big Ten championship, another Ohio State win, and a playoff.
The other part of it is it could really help your run game that much more too, because that was earlier teams. They saw what JJ did and his limited ability, both as a passer and a runner, and then they played accordingly, and that opened up more opportunities for Blake Corum because they had to be concerned enough that JJ was going to pass over their heads and do these things, and so it's one hand feeds the other, and sometimes it seems like Michigan gets away from that.
You mentioned Blake Corum; he's coming back. Chris Jenkins just announced here in the last day or so. Cornelius Johnson just announced that he's coming back to Michigan. Are these individual decisions as much as they are possibly, we've heard so much about the development of this culture over the past 2 seasons that these guys are truly wanting to come back together and make another go at this?
I think it's an impact of 3 things, really. I think what you just hit on, I think really especially just the fact that Michigan's been so close. They came away from that Georgia loss in the 2021 playoff, and it was kind of like, okay, now we understand what we need to do. Then they go out there against TCU and shoot themselves in the foot. Really, I mean, that's the type of game where, and not to be biased here, but that if they played against TCU 10 times, they probably would have won 8 of them. But when you have 2 pick sixes, come away with no points when you're within the 5 twice, which is very unlike Michigan, that's you're giving them 28 points essentially. That really set them back. So I think that there is a little bit of that true unfinished business aspect that is a big part of it, where I think that some of those guys that were on the fence look at it and say, we really can do this thing, and we should have done this thing this year. And I think that they probably watched the Georgia Ohio State game and realized, and I know people looked at the TCU Georgia result and think of that being more indicative. I think for Michigan, they're probably looking more at that game before and thinking that we had a chance to really be able to do something against Georgia, and we didn't even get that opportunity. So I think that they really want to have that opportunity. I think it is also an individual decision in terms of, I don't know that any of these guys that really are coming back, with the exception of maybe Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan, I don't know that they were necessarily going to be 3rd-round picks. I think Blake Corum certainly could have been that. I think that his knee injury probably would have, especially because it doesn't sound like he would be ready to participate in the combine and things of that nature. I think that really would have set him back, right? So I think that coming back for another year, especially knowing Donovan Edwards is a little bit more probably ready to go and spell him a bit, and so he's not carrying the ball 30 times a game, I think that probably helps a guy like him. And then I think the NIL piece, Valiant Management did a really great job with this 1 more year fund that they set up. I mean, they haven't reported apparently on any of the higher end payments, but just on the lower end payments, it equaled over $100,000 in just like a week. So I think that was at least a little bit of a lure. Not that that's going to pay all these guys necessarily equally, but at least gives them something, and who knows how much they are able to actually get overall with this idea that they were going to be able to lure some of these guys back. So I think all of those things kind of in conjunction with each other. And I do think that the culture that Jim Harbaugh has built in the last couple of years. And that's one of those things I just remember talking to my colleagues over the last few years before 2021, where it always seemed like you looked at these other schools, you'd look at Alabama, you'd look at Ohio State, you'd look at some of these other big time schools that were consistently winning, and they would get back some of those fourth or fifth year guys that you wouldn't expect. And Michigan hadn't really done that since Jim Harbaugh's second year, when Jake Butt and Jordan Lewis had come back for unexpected fourth years. After that, it just seemed like any guy who could go would. And we've seen that not pay off for a lot of different guys who, whether they were a senior who could have come back for a fifth year, or even some guys who were coming out of their third year, and you're looking at the draft boards and what they were expected to, go undrafted, and like, why are you leaving for the NFL draft? You are about to make a really bad decision, and yet they would anyway. Whereas now the culture has kind of changed, where it is kind of that we want to continue to build this thing up. We want to play our best. We want to be one of those players that really cemented that legacy of what we left behind, compared to being just another disappointing Michigan team. So I think that all kind of plays in conjunction with each other. And it's interesting to see, because I can't remember the last time that Michigan had so many guys that really could have come back and or could have gone to the NFL. Because I think just about every one of those guys that decided in the last couple of days that they were going to come back probably would have had a home in the NFL. I think that probably none of them would have gone undrafted. But a guy like Michael Barrett been like a sixth or seventh rounder? Probably. But I think that you look at that athleticism, and I think the NFL would say we can find a way to work that guy. We can use that guy. I think that all 5 or 6 of those guys who have made that decision could have gone. It's just interesting to see that they opted to give it one more go.
Great insight from Isaiah Hull. You can catch his complete work at Wolverines Wire and also on Wolverines Podcast. Isaiah, before we let you go, let people know a little bit more about what you provide there on those 2 platforms.
Well, Wolverines Wire is the main thing for me. It's the writing aspect. That's where we, for USA Today Sports Media Group, are doing the traditional beat coverage, sometimes some opinion stuff, sometimes some aggregation stuff. We just try to cover all bases. Locked On Wolverines is the podcast, is a 5-day-a-week podcast that we do through the Locked On Podcast Network. So bite-sized, 20, 30 minutes, generally max, except for the mailbag every Thursday, which tends to go well over time. And then every now and again, I get a little, fire under my rear and go on my own personal YouTube and issue some opinions with instant reactions and stuff, which I'm hoping to do a little bit more of soon. I don't have my traditional studio, even though it's all lit up back here, like I did about 6 months ago, but we're still churning out some stuff. So multiple ways that you can get it.
I enjoyed the conversation, Isaiah. Great stuff from you, and we appreciate you stopping by.
Oh, always glad to be here. Thanks for having me back on.